So I'll start with the last question, actually, which is, what if you already have some data that you entered into RevMan or that you imported previously, and you have new data extracted in Covidence and you want to do another import? What will happen with the data that's already in RevMan?
So as far as I'm aware, the data in RevMan that you've already imported will stay there, but it will be updated with new data. So if your import includes new data, that will be automatically overwritten in your RevMan review. But only for the new data. It won't delete anything that isn't new.
Yeah, exactly. So any new studies or any new outcomes for existing studies will be added onto what's already there. If you have data for the exact same result, it will overwrite that. So, and let's see. There was another question, which was actually about in Covidence you can enter both endpoint and change data. And so the question is, how will that export into RevMan?
So I'm unable to answer that question. I don't know if you or Sean can explain how that data comes across. It will definitely come out in the export file, in the CSV file.
So this is the question about exporting from RevMan Web and Covidence. And yeah, I mean, it'd be useful to understand why you want to change the setting from the Cochrane review. What's the end goal there? Don't know if we can unmute people, Daniel.
Yeah, this was a question from Susan Wieland.
Okay, sorry.
And it's I think it was sent as direct message to me. That was probably not intentional, but so that means you can't see it, unfortunately.
Hi, this is Susan. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to send it as a direct message. But sometimes you want to do sensitivity analyses according to whether the outcome was endpoint versus change. And so I notice in Covidence that you can select whether your outcome is an endpoint measure or a change measure. And so I was wondering, is there a way to get those separately, like maintain a distinction within RevMan? And I just suggested in the chat, maybe you name them pain endpoint and pain change, something like that. Would that be a solution? But then you'd have to name everything that was endpoint, everything that was change. Or maybe there's a more elegant approach. Does that make sense?
It does to me. I think the way to set this up in RevMan would be to create separate outcomes. Yeah, don't know, Gert, if you've got any more thoughts there.
No, I agree. Yeah, and I'm not entirely sure how it affects the Covidence export. Maybe that's just something to try out. But yeah, definitely in RevMan you will need to set them up as separate outcomes.
Okay.
All right.
And so then they'd have to have different names in Covidence so that you could export them as separate outcomes and know which was which.
That I'm not entirely sure of. Do you know, Julie?
Yeah, the names will have to match exactly as I've said during the demo. So you can either do that within Covidence or you can do that in the CSV file that you've exported. So you can rename items there to make sure, but they must match exactly the way that you set them up as your outcomes in RevMan. They must have the same names in the Covidence export file.
Okay, thank you.
All right. The next one is a bit of a clarification question. So there's a user who cannot see the export to RevMan web option in Covidence, and the question is that because their review is not set up as a Cochrane review. So I believe this option is available for all reviews, right? So what might cause that option to not be available then?
Okay, so that is probably because you haven't selected extraction 1. So when I'm in extraction, when I'm using extraction 1, when I go to export, I will always see this option here. If I'm in extraction 2, I see a slightly different viewpoint from here. And to change your settings, you need to go to settings, review settings, and come down to the bottom and change to extraction 1. So if you want to export using RevMan Web, then you need to be in extraction 1. If you're in extraction 2, you won't see the option to export to RevMan.
Sorry, I'm just looking for the next question. So there was a question as well about whether it's possible to export data to RevMan when in Covidence you have both dichotomous as well as continuous data for an outcome.
Yes, you just need to set up different outcomes. That's all, so that you I can have an outcome about my common cold, and it could be have both dichotomous and continuous data. They need to be 2 separate outcomes. They will need to be 2 separate outcomes within Covidence to create your outcome table, and there'll need to be 2 outcomes within RevMan to be able to import the data across.
Yep, and just maybe one thing to add as well, because this is different from how things used to work in RevMan, is that you can have both, for example, if you have a dichotomous outcome, you can have both like the raw count data at the arm level, as well as, for example, reported odds ratios. Those can be reported against the same outcome in RevMan Web, but not purely dichotomous and purely continuous data on the same outcome. Those will need to be set up as separate. Let's see. That's the endpointer change. So I think this is also a good question. So there's a question that came in right as you started, actually. So it's been waiting for quite a while for the answer to this one. The question is, do you use any common ontologies, like, for example, SNOMED CT or LOINC, to describe the data?
I'm unable to answer that question, but I can certainly get back to you about that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I guess what we can say is that right now, data as extracted in Covidence is free text, and in RevMan is free text as well. So we're not using structured data in that way. However, there's certainly been discussions at Cochrane of how we could benefit from more structured data in these areas. So yeah, we'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Excellent, thanks. I will scroll through once more to see if I've missed anything. There was a question about these notes about the formatting, but you've addressed that already, Julie. And let's see. And in this webinar, we have covered only RevMan Web, as RevMan 5 is no longer supported.
There's a question just coming, Gert.
Oh, there's a new question. Excellent.
About changing from data extraction 2 to 1. Julie, I don't know if you want to answer that one.
Just, do you mind reading it out to me? It's,
Sure. Chris, the question is, does changing data extraction 2 to data extraction 1 cause any change in data? We have already extracted data by data extraction 2 form. Yeah, so just worried about losing data.
Yeah, so any data that you've already captured in extraction 2 will not be automatically moved over to extraction 1. And so we don't support that. You would have to create a new template in extraction 1 and re-enter that data. Excuse me, unfortunately.
Yeah. And I'm not entirely aware of the export options for data extraction 2, but if you really are like very far into data extraction, it might be worth looking at the CSV import formats that RevMan expects and see if that's an operation that you can do in Excel to reformat the data rather than having to redo everything in Covidence. It really depends, I guess, on how you've done the data extraction and so on, but I think it's at least worth looking into.
It's a good suggestion. It would take a little bit of work. And again, it depends on how many studies and outcomes you've got in order to set them up in the correct format.
Yeah, there was, I think I've got 2 more questions here that'll be fairly quick. So one is essentially a suggestion to improve some of the errors that happen in RevMan and clarify what can be done about them. So maybe you want to respond to that, Sean?
Yes, could you just read out the question? I don't have it in the main chat.
Yeah, no, it is. And you've responded on the main chat, but I thought it was worth sharing the answer in general. So the question was, when these errors happen on import, they can be a little unclear, and can we help people understand them better?
Yeah, so we do have a knowledge base article that might help decrypt some of these messages and provide hints on how the data might need to be tweaked to get to a successful import. We're also looking at trying to provide some of these hints within the validation messages themselves so that you don't have to go to documentation. And certainly if anyone would be interested in road testing these messages, it would be great to hear from you. I'm going to post the knowledge base article in the main chat.
Excellent.
So, okay, everyone can reference it.
All right. The next one is someone who's eager to be able to use risk of bias too. So I do believe this is on the roadmap, but is there anything more specific than that you can say already, Julie?
Can't give you an exact time point, but it's definitely will be coming very soon as we're making lots of changes to extraction 1 and improving it, and that's part of the process of that. So it will be coming soon. We do realize that it's an option that lots of our users want, so we are responding to that request.
Great, thank you.
And just to say that RevMan will be ready to import that data once that export has been released.
All right. So there's one more question that's just come in, which is, do you need to have your analyses pre-specified in RevMan Web? So I'm not entirely sure if the question is, do you need to have them pre-specified in order for the data to appear like it did for you, Julie, or whether it means that you have to do it before you import? So maybe we can just answer both of those versions of the question.
Yes, so you don't have to have them pre-specified in order to bring the data across. That was just an example that I've set up so that you could see the data that was visible there. Don't know if one of you wants to answer the other part of the question. You should always have your analyses pre-specified in your protocol. That's obviously really important.
Yeah, it's an encouraged way of working to have your analyses predefined. at protocol stage. Certainly the intervention review template shows this as well, but it's not mandatory to get everything to work as being demoed. You can define your analyses after you've imported study data if you've got a reason to do so.